Colin.
Yes, Colin Savory. My question is for Anna Dismore.
Speak up, please.
Stand up.
Doesn't work.
You mentioned Israel just now, so please tell us about Israel, because we understand very well that when you were MP, you did support Israel, but you would, if you were voted back in, you would represent a party which clearly does not. So why on earth should we be Turkeys voting for Christmas and vote for a Labour Party whose leader clearly does not support Israel and would act against the interests of the state of Israel?
Just before we answer this question, this is a question which everyone on the panel is clearly going to have a view on, and everyone in the audience. Again, I just reiterate, please can we make sure that everyone gets a fair hearing? You don't have to vote for them if you don't like what they say, but we're not going to barrack them whilst they're trying to get their point across. So again, please, let's remember where we are, remember who we represent, the community we're in. And the question is directed at Andrew, but I'm sure the rest of the panel will want to speak broadly about their party's policies on Israel this year. So Andrew, please.
Well, I mean, the question's in two parts, I suppose. One's my own personal position, and the other is the position of the Labour Party. As far as my own personal position is concerned, I think my track record speaks for itself. I've stood up for Israel on many occasions, often in a hostile House of Commons from the and will continue to do so. When there was no debate on Operation Cast Lead, I participated in the Radio 4 debate all evening. I led the case for Israel on Radio 4 national radio, and I will do that again. As far as the Labour Party is concerned, I've got the Labour Party policy book here. I'll read it to you. Labour does, and we will continue to resolutely oppose the isolation of Israel. No one should question Israel's right to exist. Labour has been clear that the threat of boycotts of Israel is the wrong response, and we believe this would not help advance the peace process. Labour defends Israel's rights to defend itself against rocket attacks. Hamas wholly unjustified rocket attacks on Israeli citizens, as well as the building of tunnels for terrorist purposes, show the organisation's murderous intent. That, I think, is a very clear statement. Now, if you're concerned about what happened in the summer, let's remember that what happened there divided the Jewish community in this city and in this country as well. The Jewish News Survey showed it was roughly 50-50, those who supported Israel's incursion in Gaza and those who didn't. That's what Jewish News surveys say. Now, the point I make quite simply is this. I'm on record as saying I disagree with that policy. I disagree with that policy. I wrote about it. You could have read my article in the Jewish News about it if you take the Jewish News. I disagree with that policy. But there is a logic to it. And the logic goes like this. Ed's position was that for short-term security gain, which Israel obviously got from that, it sold up longer-term problems for itself. It strengthened Hamas in the West Bank. It made strengthening Hamas in Gaza more likely with a new generation of terrorist recruits, which we now see marching up and down. The rebuilding of the terrorist attack tunnels. We're back to square one again. Is Israel going to be attacking Gaza every 9 months or a year? Because that is not a recipe for peace. What we have to try and do is to get the peace process back on track again. What we have to try and do is get negotiations going again. And I think after the attack on Gaza, there was a small window of opportunity there, having dealt with the terrorists of Hamas, a small opportunity there to try and get the process moving again. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And our view all along has been, and I hope people here would agree with it, that we need to have a two-state solution with a viable Palestinian state alongside an Israel secure in its borders. That has to be the objective of everybody out there. And that is the objective of the Labour government. We will do all we can to try and achieve that objective, and you have my personal assurance that I will do anything I can to support that objective too. And I think my track record shows quite clearly that I stand up for Israel, always have done, always will do.
I'll give some extra time on this question, so please don't feel the need to shout, and we'll have some back and forth.
Thank you. Absolutely right. The Israel state has a right to exist, and I fully support that. In fact, Israel is a beacon of liberal democracy in the area, and in fact, it used the liberal values of self-determination. So it's something that we support. I support personally, and it has a right to exist and to defend itself. I'm in favour of the two-state solution. I think it's very important that we have peace for everyone in the area, and in order to do so, we need to get both sides to be sitting down at the negotiation table. Now, our party's view is very broad on that, and I do think that that we need to support any political movement from both sides to peace. Okay, so with the parliamentary vote last year to recognise the state of Israel, state of Palestine, excuse me, I do support that as a political avenue to peace. The Oslo Accords have broken down because of the reprehensible nature of Hamas, and they are completely against what the Oslo Accords were meant to be. But we need to support any political movement to peace, which is why I think it was important to send a message to the West Bank that where there is a political avenue to recognise the state of Palestine, that we will support.
Yeah, so sorry if you've already read our manifesto, but we seek a just, sustainable and peaceful solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict based on mutual recognition of the rights and independent statehood of Palestinians and Israelis. And we condemn human rights violations by both parties, Palestinians especially. That's my parenthesis. And oppression and disproportionate use of aggression by Israel against the people of Gaza. We seek to suspend the EU-Israel trade agreement. I think we've also agreed, after some pressure, to promote peace, security, prosperity and equality for Israel and its neighbours. A friend of mine from that cycled to Israel. Unfortunately, when he got to Syria, he had to take a bus because the situation had blown up there. I really enjoyed my trip to Israel, but constantly hanging over me was the sense of powerlessness, the fact that we were surrounded by all these enemies, but you know, people are dying there, and it's a really not good situation. To advocate for a permanent, comprehensive solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, resulting in secure Israel alongside a viable Palestinian state. I mean, we've always stood for peace, and the anti-nuclear thing links back with that. You know, we would hate to see everyone escalating. It should be fewer nuclear weapons around, and generally, I mean, the reason why we've had so much bad press from the JC this week is because of the arms trade, but we're equally against Saudi Arabia having lots of weapons. They've got money to spend. They're spending it, as you know, on serious escalation of violence in the region. And we also want to promote peace projects that unite communities, and we do want to resist the boycott of our
No, I thought I was going to be the bogeyman here tonight, but watching you listening to the Greens, I can see that I'm Mr. Popular. Andrew's a sincere man, and he's been a good defender of Israel. But his party, Ed Miliband had a 3-line whip to support the motion to recognise Palestine. Will that bring peace any closer? No. It was always held out as for the final peace solution, that there would be a UN recognition of Palestine when there was a final peace agreement. It brings peace no closer. If anything, it makes it go further away. But the real thing, and I think what's going to really support the Conservatives, is the threat of the SNP. Alex Salmond voted during the Gaza war for an embargo, an arms embargo on Israel. He didn't worry about the Palestinians supporting the Hamas. He was quite happy with that. He just wanted an arms embargo on Israel. These are the people that Labour Party is going to get in bed with. But they're not going to have a majority. They're going to be the natural partners. He didn't want to say so in the television debate, but that's what's going to happen. And it's very sad, because Andrew's a good MP, but Andrew is a credible man, and he was a very, very good MP when he stood for this constituency, when he served this constituency. But you can see what's going to happen. Read the political map. You don't want a Labour government getting into bed with the SNP. It's disastrous for Israel. And further, with regard to the EU, putting on my UKIP hat. The EU pours millions into Palestine. Where does it go to? No audit trail, no accountability. It's going to people's private pockets and to build tunnels and to buy arms. And that's where the EU money is going.
I'm going to say some things which I think many people don't expect me to say. I paid tribute to Andrew's work when he was a Member of Parliament for the Jewish community and indeed for Israel, as I did at the West End Mosque the other day, and I congratulated you for defending Israel, and I do so again. But it's not him. It's not him. I've sat in Parliament for the last 5 years. The first time I remember, I made a note, Mavi Malnara, and I remember listening to people like David Winnick saying that Israel did not care about the international community. And he says, unless firm action is taken by the international community, we see further tragedies when the country was trying to protect itself. Universal jurisdiction. I went on the Bill committee so I could actually change it, something which Andrew wanted to do, but the Labour Party wouldn't let him. And Anne Clwyd made it very clear that a Labour government would change the law on universal jurisdiction. And most of all, I remember the debate on Palestinian statehood, which was a backbench business committee. The government don't vote on it. No government minister is allowed to vote on it. And EdM and Lab told his parliamentary party, a 3-line whip, you have to vote for it, which was disgraceful. And I was proud, though I don't think it was my finest moment, because I had to get so much out in such very little time, but I was proud to stand up and defend Israel, while I was heckled from the whole of the House by about 300 people. So be it. I'd rather lose an election and do what I think is right than to say something I don't think is right and force my way through. But I was proud on that night to be one of the 12 that voted against the motion because it undermined the Oslo Peace Accords. And most of all, I'm particularly proud of my colleague Mike Freer, who resigned from the government as a result of that vote. And so the point is, it's not about Andrew, it's not necessarily about me, it's where our parties are at. And David Cameron has a record second to none with Israel. He's defended Israel again and again and again, and I was very proud when I asked him on the floor of the House of Commons to visit Israel, and he did. The first member of the British Parliament as PM who spoke to the Knesset, and it was a very proud moment for many people, including myself.
On this point, obviously, the subject of Israel is one that we all care very deeply about, parties and members. If anyone, there's some time for us to take some short comments. We will have, well, Andrew will have a brief response, and then we can come back with a few non-questions but comments if you want to share.
Okay, well, there are a couple of other points there about the SNP and the EU which we'll come on to separately, so I won't respond to those now, but I'm happy to do that later. Look, there's a number of issues here. Universal jurisdiction, I was actually promoting a private member's bill at the time of the election being called. Palestine recognition, I would have voted against it, and I've made that absolutely clear at the time.
I'm sure.
I think one of the key issues here, though, is that what we don't want to see is Israel becoming a political football between the two key parties. There's a risk that the community starts to drive the parties apart rather than bring them together, because we've always had traditionally a pretty consensus view of the issue around Israel. And as far as Mr Cameron is concerned, I mean, some of you may remember this headline in the JC, Fury over Cameron's remarks on Gaza. That's the Jewish Chronicle, when they talked about when Cameron attacked Israel for attacking the arms flotilla from Turkey, and when he called Gaza a concentration camp. Now, his position's changed, and I'm sure Ed's position has changed as you get experience. And all parties have people like Baroness Swazi and Alan Duncan who are hostile to Israel. So it's not a party political thing. I think what we have to try and do is the best we can is to try and bring the parties together, not push them apart. There's a real risk. And I think it's really dangerous if the community, if it starts to try and turn this into a party political football between the Conservatives and Labour. I'm grateful for Matthew's comments about my work on Israel, and I'd echo it back to him. I don't think you'll find much of a cigarette paper between us as individuals on the issues that are there. But I would really hate to see, is the community somehow seeing this as the divisive issue between left and right, Conservatives and Labour. What we have to try and do is make sure that Israel has the support of a united government in terms of its support for a peaceful two-state solution. However far away it is now, we all have to work towards that option, because it's the only ball game in town. And I think if we start to try and divide the House of Commons, divide the political parties, it will make that much harder to achieve from our own point of view.
We're going to have some time now to, if people got any kind of comments they want to add into the fray here.